The strongest rider at the Tour de France usually loses. Read that again. The biggest engine, the fastest legs, the man tearing the field apart in June. History says he's the one most likely to break in July. I'm Sebastian, and on this channel we open up the human body like a case file. And this case already has a victim hiding in plain sight, because right now one man is destroying everyone so completely, it might be the most dangerous thing that could happen to him. Tadej Pogačar just won the Tour de Suisse by 6 minutes and 32 seconds, with 3 stage wins, swallowing his last rival with 800 meters to go like it was a training ride. 2 weeks before the biggest race on Earth. So he's the favorite. Case closed? Not even close. Because the Tour is never won by the strongest body. It's won by the one who can hide that strength and release it on exactly the right day. Miss that day by 72 hours, and you don't fade. You fall apart. Don't believe me? Ask Primož Roglič, who won this same June warm-up race twice, and both times crashed out of the Tour weeks later, turning a perfect June into heartbreak. So here's the real question nobody in the highlight reels is asking. Of all the favorites rolling out in Barcelona on July 4th, who's actually arriving in the right shape, and who's a ticking clock dressed up as a champion? Let's open the files. File 1. Tadej Pogačar, and the curse of being a god in June. He's chasing a record-equaling 5th Tour, a feat managed by only 4 men in over 100 years. Anquetil, Merckx, Hinault, and Indurain. And Indurain, the last man to win 5 in a row, carried numbers that were almost inhuman. A resting heart rate reported around 28 beats per minute, when yours is closer to 70. Lungs near 8 liters of air. A ceiling for burning oxygen, what we call VO2 max, up around 88, nearly double a fit amateurs. Treat those figures with care. They live between the laboratory and legend, but even halved, they sit at the edge of what a human can do. That's the ceiling Pogačar is climbing toward. So why am I not sure his form is good news? Because in my field there's a name for the most dangerous game in sport. We call it peaking. A rider's form isn't the same as being fit. Form is fitness minus fatigue. You train until you're buried in exhaustion. Then in the final weeks you cut the volume but keep the intensity sharp. The fatigue evaporates, and everything underneath floats to the surface. A well-timed taper makes you dramatically faster without your engine getting any bigger. But that peak is a window measured in weeks, not months. Burn it too early, and there's no getting it back. So when a man demolishes a week-long race in June, you have to ask, did he show us his peak 2 weeks too soon? Even his own team can't be sure. Hold that thought. Because the man most likely to pounce on a crack is, right now, doing something far more frightening than winning. He's simply breathing normally. File 2. Jonas Vingegaard, the man with the rebuilt lungs. 2 years ago, Vingegaard hit the tarmac in northern Spain at terrifying speed. The damage reads like a war report. A broken collarbone, fractured ribs, a bruised lung, and a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung. 12 days in hospital, much of it in intensive care. His team said quietly that the Tour was not a priority, and for a few dark weeks people wondered if his career was over. A man who makes his living turning oxygen into speed, lying in intensive care, relearning how to take a full breath. And this May, he won the Giro d'Italia with 5 stage wins, becoming the 8th rider in history to win all 3 Grand Tours. Now he wants the thing almost nobody dares anymore, the Giro and the Tour in one summer. But here's the question that should keep him awake. Did he get all of his lungs back? A pneumothorax is air leaking into the space around the lung partly deflating, shrinking the surface where oxygen crosses into your blood. For most people, you heal and move on. But this is a man whose career is built on forcing oxygen into his bloodstream. On a mountain, in thin air, for 40 minutes straight. Every percent he didn't get back is climbing power gone forever. So can you really come back from something like that? History says yes, in the most brutal way. In 1987, Greg LeMond was accidentally shot on a hunting trip. Around 30 pellets in his back and chest, some lodged next to the lining of his heart. The sport wrote him off for dead. 2 years later, he won the closest tour in history, by 8 seconds. So comebacks like this are possible. The only question is whether Vingegaard's is truly complete, or whether the Giro already hollowed him out. File 3. Remco Evenepoel, the gambler. While Pogačar races everything, and Vingegaard races a whole other Grand Tour, Evenepoel is doing something that almost looks lazy. He's barely racing at all. He skipped the Spring Classics, skipped the Giro, and spent more than 2 months training high in the mountains, betting his whole tour on one word: fresh. But the race has set a trap. His superpower is the time trial, a man alone against the clock, where no teammate can help and no rival can hide. And this year's route doesn't hand him a single individual time trial until stage 16. They've buried his best weapon deep in the race, for a moment when he'll already be exhausted. Freshness is a real measurable advantage. But race rhythm is real too, and too little racing can leave you undercooked for the surging stop and start violence of a summit finish. A pure time trial engine, trained for smooth seated power, can fall apart the moment the road kicks above 8% and the attacks rain down. So Remco is the cleanest bet in this race. Can freshness alone beat the men who've been at war since spring? But honestly, the most frightening rider at this tour might not even be a leader. File 4. Isaac Del Toro, the weapon they won't unleash. There's a 22-year-old on Pogačar's own team who on any other squad on the planet would be the leader. This season alone he's won 3 major stage races. He just won the Old Dauphiné, the official dress rehearsal for the tour, by dropping every rival, including the leaders of other teams. And his reward for being that good? Spending July as Pogačar's bodyguard. In my world, a rider like Del Toro is a weapon with a name, the human metronome. He sits on the front and sets a pace just below everyone's breaking point. Easy for him, lethal for them. He forces the rivals into deep oxygen debt and drains their fuel tanks, so that when Pogačar finally attacks, the others are already running on empty. Remember, sitting out in the wind costs you everything. Tucked in behind a teammate, drafting saves you 30 to 50% of your energy. So a super strong helper grinding away on the front isn't helping his leader. He's slowly drowning everyone else. So what happens when the helper is strong enough to beat the masters? That, my friends, is a story for July. File 5. Juan Ayuso and the weight of the crown. Ayuso looked at that same Emirates machine and walked out the door in one of the ugliest divorces in recent cycling. A torn-up contract, a fresh start at a new team, and for the first time, a tour to lead himself. The yellow jersey dream is finally his to chase. And that might just be his biggest problem. Here's something the power numbers will never show you. Leadership is physically expensive. Chronic psychological stress raises cortisol, your body's main stress hormone, and cortisol breaks muscle down, weakens your immune system, and wrecks your sleep. And sleep is where the real recovery happens. Cut an athlete to around 5 hours a night for a week, and testosterone can drop by 10 to 15%, while every effort feels harder. So you can do everything right in training, and still arrive in Paris flat, because the pressure quietly devoured your recovery from the inside. The question isn't whether Ayuso can carry the weight. It's whether the weight ends up carrying him. And he's not the only young threat circling the favorites. Lenny Martinez, just 22, a featherlight pure climber, was off the front alone in Switzerland, and only caught by Pogačar himself inside the final 800 meters. Paul Seixas, a 19-year-old French debutante carrying the hopes of a nation, is already bruised and battered by a crash before the race has even begun. And on Vingegaard's team comes the loss that might quietly decide everything. Wout van Aert, his most important bodyguard, is out of the entire tour after a wound on his elbow turned septic and put him in hospital. His team replaced him at the last minute and called it a major blow. They're not exaggerating. Van Aert controlled the wind, chased down the dangerous attacks, and dragged Vingegaard to the foot of the final climbs. Without him, the safety net is gone. So where does all of this actually get decided? In an Inferno. This tour ends with back-to-back mountaintop battles on the legendary Alpe d'Huez, on stages 19 and 20. 2 days in a row, up the same 21 hairpin bends, on legs that are already destroyed. The Col du Galibier, over 2,600 meters high, is the highest point of the race. And up there, the thin air rations your oxygen, dropping your ceiling for burning oxygen by as much as 10 to 15%. The mountain literally throttles your engine. And here's the warning every favorite should fear, especially a man who peaked too soon. The mountain does not care how strong you looked in June. In 1967, on the slopes of Mont Ventoux, in suffocating heat, a British rider named Tom Simpson began to weave across the road, collapsed a few hundred meters from the summit, and died. The cause was heart failure from sheer exhaustion, a body overwhelmed by the heat, by the drugs in his system, and by a will that refused to listen to it. Because that is what the heat does. It switches off the alarm, silencing the warning sirens your own body is screaming. Push past about 40 degrees Celsius inside, and the systems keeping you alive start to shut down, one by one. In the final week of this tour, in that heat, on those climbs, it won't be the strongest legs that survive. It will be the smartest body. So forget who looks strongest today. The strongest body almost never wins this race. The winner is the one who can time an invisible peak, hide it like a secret, and survive what 3 weeks of mountains and heat do to a human being. Down in the comments, tell me this. Who do you think timed it right? And who's the ticking clock? I'm Sebastian, from the Injury Breakdown. The race begins in Barcelona on July 4th, and the body always keeps the score. And if you want to see this pushed to its absolute limit, go watch my next one. Pogačar versus Merckx, the physiology comparison nobody wants to make. What happens if we put Eddie Merckx, the peak cannibal of 1972, on Pogačar's 6.8 kilogram carbon machine, with modern nutrition, altitude camps, and a sports science team behind him? And what happens if we do the reverse and drop Pogačar back into 1972 on a steel colnago, in a wool jersey and a leather hairnet helmet, fueled by 30 grams of carbs an hour from a steak sandwich? The answer is wilder than you think. It's on screen now. Go watch it.